to last 5 years as to how it has been able to manage the economy amidst the turbulences, both the economic turbulences globally at a time when countries are facing the headwinds, but also in terms of the COVID headwinds. So that is something that is expected during the budget announcement. So I'm standing just near the Indian Finance Ministry, and if I can give you a kind of a view, a ground view of the situation, the entire movement of the political leadership is expected to happen here very soon. The location you can see on your screen is the Raisina Hill, where the Finance Ministry and the Rashtrapati Bhavan are located, and essentially we will see more visuals coming shortly of the movement of the Indian Finance Minister. And this is by protocol that the Indian Finance Minister, after her visit to the Finance Ministry, goes to the Rashtrapati Bhavan, where she meets the President. And this year the budget session has a focus also on Nari Shakti. Both the President being the woman President and the Finance Minister being a woman Finance Minister is something that was pointed out by the Indian Prime Minister as well ahead of the opening of the budget session. But all in all, an important day for India in terms of how one of the largest economies in the world takes its trajectory towards a much higher pedestal.
Right, Siddhant, we are expecting the Indian Finance Minister to exit the Finance Ministry there, like you mentioned, with a budget team, after which she will leave for the Rashtrapati Bhavan and meet the Indian President, after which she will move towards the Parliament and present the Interim Budget 2024. You spoke of how there are turbulences that we are facing in the world today. The 2020s have seen two wars and geopolitical tensions and fragmentations, which has become the recent theme in today's time. Talk to us about how crucial is India's defence spending this time around.
Well, when it comes to defence, there are several sub-headers. One is the operational cost, one is the modernization cost. India is keen to get a much more modern army, a much more modern military, and of course also on infrastructure development in the border areas, especially in the northern borders. Talking about the last bit first, we know that when it comes to the northern border of India, India is facing the Chinese aggressive actions, and this is something that is worrisome. We have seen the relationship between the two countries falling since the Galwan incident of 2020. India lost many of its soldiers during the aggressive action by the Chinese, and since then India has been increasing spending on infrastructure development. We have seen the Indian Defence Minister opening roads, building opening of the border, the bridges as well in the border areas, and also India's support to the Vibrant Village program as well. So the money is something that will be announced for these projects. But now talking about the modernization bit, getting new equipments, new assets is something that is very high on the agenda as well, and the figures are expected to show where the Indian government is keen to spend in terms of acquiring new assets. We just saw recently the French president's visit. The French President Emmanuel Macron was in India, and while there was no big ticket announcement on the defense bit, we know that the focus has been when it comes to the Rafale deal, the submarine deal, and this is something that comes in the commercial aspect. So all in all, defense is something that is one of the key priority area for the Indian government, and this time as well, while the outlay is something that everyone will be closely watching, the increased outlay, the focus will be where the spending goes and the expenditure as well of the Indian government when it comes to the defense sector. This is something, as we have been talking about, a priority area for the Indian government.
Right, Siddhant. Apart from the defense spending, like you outlined, it is a priority area for the Indian government. India has also outlined its vision of getting global companies to set up manufacturing plants in the country. Talk to us more about India's Make in India vision.
Well, Make in India has been an initiative that has been an ongoing initiative. India has announced several programs including, of course, the PLI as well, to bring in more investment. But if we break the manufacturing bit into several elements, one of the focus area has been semiconductors. We saw recently the Indian External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Shankar, talking about how India wants to be a part of the semiconductor supply chain, and there should not be concentration of manufacturing globally. So India wants to be one of the major centers of manufacturing. That, of course, creates jobs as well, and this is something that is bound to be reflected during the budget announcement by the Indian Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. This is something that has been reflected by other ministers as well, whether it's the External Affairs Minister, whether it is India's IT Minister as well. And we recently saw a significant announcement of Padma Awards being announced for the Foxconn CEO, who is a Taiwan national. So that means that India is engaging with several countries in the region and in the Indo-Pacific as well, for these companies to set up bases here in India, so that India can be a next superpower when it comes to the semiconductor bit.
Right, Siddhant, thanks very much. We'll of course be and we are getting live visuals of the Indian Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman exiting the Ministry of Finance, after which she is now heading towards the Rashtrapati Bhavan, where she will meet the Indian President Draupadi Murmu. And these are the live visuals from New Delhi, where the Indian Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, along with her budget team, is leaving the Finance Ministry. She will now be meeting the Indian President Draupadi Murmu ahead of presenting the Interim Budget 2024. We'll of course be tracking this very closely here on WION. In other global news, sexual predators, suicide tendencies, eating disorders and unrealistic beauty standards. They are just some of the issues that young people are dealing with on social media. And children activists and lawyers say that companies are not doing enough to protect them. On Wednesday, the CEOs of Meta, TikTok, X and Snap testified in the Senate Judiciary Committee addressing the charges. The tech chiefs are faced with a torrent of political anger over the accusations. During the hearing, senators told Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg that his tech platform is responsible for people's deaths. Take a listen.
Mr. Zuckerberg, you and the companies before us, I know you don't mean it to be so, but you have blood on your hands. You have a product. You have a product that's killing people.
Throughout the course of the hearing, parents who lost their children to suicide held up pictures of their kids. The hearing began with recorded testimony of survivors and the parents of the children who have been affected.
The man who initially exploited my body is currently incarcerated. But the man who allowed my abuse to spread on Facebook was in that hearing room with me moments ago. His name is Mark Zuckerberg.
I lost my 17-year-old son July 27th, 2022. Took his life after being extorted on Instagram. The symbol that I wear, my senator wore today, is a lesson 3 sign, which is the last message that my son sent out before he took his life, just as a way to tell his friends, I love you.
TikTok CEO Shou Chew said that the platform, as I'm quoting here, vigilant about enforcing its 13 and up age policy. Meanwhile, Linda Yaccarino, the CEO of the social media platform X, urged the Senate to pass the Report Act and showed favor for the Support Act, both of which can protect young adults and children. Senator Josh Hawley questioned the Meta CEO over compensations for the victims. He added, and I'm quoting here, that 37% of teenage girls between 13 and 15 were exposed to unwanted nudity in a week on Instagram. In a stunning moment during the hearing, the Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg apologized to the parents of victims while he was on the dais there.
You know, Why does everything you all no one should actually go through the things that your families have suffered? And this is why we invested so much and are going to continue doing industry-leading efforts to make sure that no one has to go through the types of things that your families have had to suffer.
Meanwhile, the Snap Inc. CEO also offered similar condolences to parents whose children were able to access illegal drugs on Snapchat. And our correspondent Susan Tharani tells us how the head of these social media platforms listed a slew of ways they have tried to protect children on their sites, and if the lawmakers were convinced or not. Take a listen.
Leaders of big social media companies tried in vain to convince the powerful Senate Judiciary Committee that they've made advances to protect children from predators, drugs, and hateful content that may lead to suicide. However, senators from both sides of the aisle weren't buying it, and now lawmakers are ready to give parents the power to sue social media companies. They put each executive on record on Wednesday asking them whether they would support the more than dozen bills put forth to rein in on big tech. The answer was a deafening silence. One of the most disheartening moments during that hearing was when Mark Zuckerberg said that there is not enough evidence to prove the connection between mental health issues and the use of social media by teenagers and children.
In other global news, US and China sit down in Beijing on Tuesday for the first talk in years on stemming the production of synthetic opioid fentanyl. Washington has long accused Beijing in the deadly fentanyl trade that has ravaged communities across the country. Beijing denies this, touting its zero-tolerance drug policies and insisting that the roots of the addiction crisis lies in the U.S. In recent years, the drug has fueled a surge in U.S. opioid overdose deaths. Well, a drug fentanyl is approximately 100 times more potent than morphine and 50 times more potent than heroin. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency has described China as the main source for all drug-related substances trafficked into the United States of America. A 2023 report by the Research Service noted that direct supplies of the drug from China had been stemmed by stricter controls from Beijing in 2019. However, it said that the move had simply shifted the supply lines. Instead of drugs being supplied directly through international courier services, it said chemical components are instead shipped from China to Mexico. They are then manufactured into fentanyl and smuggled across the border. Beijing, which previously insisted that there is no such thing as illegal trafficking of fentanyl between China and Mexico, has since promised to crack down. In December, its foreign ministry said that Beijing was engaged in campaigns against the drug and its precursor chemicals. Now, widely used in hospitals during anesthesia or for pain relief, the drug has become a major black market narcotic in the U.S. Overdose may result in changes in pupil size, cold, clammy skin, and respiratory failure, leading to death. Meanwhile, FBI Director Christopher Wray has warned that Chinese hackers are preparing to create chaos in real-world harm to the U.S. This comes after U.S. officials claimed that they disrupted a state-backed Chinese effort to plant malware that could be used to damage civilian infrastructure. Officials alleged that the ultimate targets include water treatment plants, oil and gas pipelines. The electrical grid and transportation systems across the U.S., at least a portion of that operation attributed to a group of hackers known as Volt Typhoon. That was disrupted after FBI and Justice Department officials obtained search and seizure orders in the Houston federal court in the month of December. FBI director laid out fresh warnings before House lawmakers about Beijing's global ambitions.
To quantify what we're up against, the PRC has a bigger hacking program than that of every major nation combined. In fact, In fact, if you took every single one of the FBI's cyber agents and intelligence analysts and focused them exclusively on the China threat, China's hackers would still outnumber FBI cyber personnel by at least 50 to 1.
The US has in the past few years become more aggressive in trying to disrupt and dismantle both criminal and state-backed cyber operations. Now, the White House has increasingly focused on hacking, not only for fear nation states may try to disrupt the US election in November, but because ransomware has also created a lot of chaos in corporate America in 2023. On the eve of June visit to China last year by Secretary of State Antony Blinken, state-backed Chinese hackers foiled Microsoft cloud-based security and hacking the email of officials at multiple US agencies that deal with China. Moreover, national security experts said that such breaches could enable China to remotely disrupt important facilities in the Indo-Pacific region that in some form support or service the US military operations. In other global news, India's central bank has dropped the hammer on Paytm Payments Bank. In a move prompted by supervisory concerns, the central bank has imposed stringent restrictions on the digital banking giant. Let's study more about this. Now, this means that Paytm can no longer accept new deposits, credit transactions or top-ups in any accounts after February 29th. Existing customers can still withdraw or use their existing balances freely, including savings accounts, prepaid instruments and digital wallets. While basic account access remains, services like fund transfers and UPI payments are now off limits for Paytm. The bank is facing a deadline of March 15th to settle all pending transactions and obligations. The Reserve Bank cited persistent non-compliances and continued material supervisory concerns as reasons for its action. Now, these concerns stem from audits and compliance checks revealing issues with Paytm's practices. Details of these concerns have not been officially disclosed but could involve data security, customer protection or regulatory violations. Paytm faces the immediate challenge of addressing these concerns and regaining the regulatory trust needed to resume normal operations. Now, the inability to add new funds or use the platform for transactions like sending money will impact daily usage. For those heavily reliant on Paytm, other digital payment options or traditional banking channels or cash that might be required right now, well, time will tell what the long-term implications are for Paytm and its wider user base. But for now, caution and exploring other options might be prudent. And with that, we call it a wrap. Thanks very much for staying with us. You're watching WION World is One. Stay tuned.
WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION, World is One.
In 1979, two batchmates from CMTI teamed up with their mentor to create a small engineering design bureau.
We could conceive machines from first principles. And that's where we got the confidence that can we start a consulting company where we do design for others. We have got an opportunity to make special machines for a company called Car Mobiles Limited. Once we started showing in the exhibition, other auto component companies started coming to us. We realized that if you want to learn anything, buy the best book on the subject, study the fundamentals, and apply it in your context.
As election fever grips Pakistan, WION gets you all the twists and turns. The row over election and selection. Players who matter and what's at stake.
नौजवानों का मुस्तकबिल मेरी सबसे ज्यादा तवज्जो होगी।
गुर्बत का खात्मा करना होगा।
एक बार मौका दीजिए।
अगर आप अपने हुकूक के लिए नहीं खड़े होंगे, आप गुलामों की जिंदगी गुजारे।
The highs and lows as the campaign peaks.
आगे बढ़ें। I'm Anas Malik. Catch me on WION as I bring you all the latest updates and developments from ground zero.
Who will emerge as Pakistan's next leader?
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy in personalized programs that help you take charge of your own health. A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at yo1.com.
India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America.
All eyes on the budget 2024. Youth, farmers, the poor and women are likely to be the strong focus. But the question is, will the budget be able to maintain the high rate of growth? The domestic economy is strong in India. What will be announced to keep the momentum going? Welcome to WION World is One. My name is Priyanka Sharma. Through the next few hours, we'll get you expert analysis, analyst predictions and, of course, what India Inc. wants from the budget. But first up, the headlines. India's Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to present the interim budget today ahead of the elections, marking the final budget in Prime Minister Modi's second term. The White House says the Islamic resistance in Iraq is behind the weekend drone attack that killed 3 American soldiers at the Jordan base. Netanyahu alleges that the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees is totally infiltrated by Hamas after Israel claims that 12 staffers participated in the October 7th attack. The US Senate Judiciary Committee lawmakers grilled TikTok, X, and Meta CEOs about online child safety for hours. The Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg turns around to apologize to parents. The UN top court mostly rejects Kyiv's terrorism claims against Russia and eastern Ukraine, only says that Moscow had quote-unquote failed to investigate alleged breaches. And the much-anticipated showdown between Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi is off. The Portuguese superstar has been ruled out of Al Nassr's friendly against Messi's Inter Miami with an injury. India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is all geared up to present the interim budget for 24-25 later on Thursday. Let's now break down the expectations for you. Take a look.
दुनिया में गंभीर संकटों के बीच भारत सबसे तेजी से विकसित होती बड़ी अर्थव्यवस्था बना। लगातार 2 क्वार्टर से भारत की विकास दर 7.5% से ऊपर रही है।
The interim budget offers a preliminary view of the government's broad plan for the upcoming fiscal year starting in April. It is required for the authorization of expenditures until a new government is formed. July will see the presentation of the whole budget following the election results.
जब चुनाव का समय निकट होता है तब आम तौर पर पूर्ण बजट नहीं रखा जाता है। हम भी उसी परंपरा का निर्वाह करते हुए पूर्ण बजट नई सरकार बनने के बाद आपके समक्ष लेकर के आएंगे।
The latest economic report pegs India's growth at 7%. The finance minister is expected to hail the country's growth prospects. The budget will have a strong emphasis on capital expenditure and at the same time look at fiscal consolidation. For this year, the government is expected to say they are on the path to achieve the deficit target of 5.9% of GDP. That is mainly because of direct tax collections, better than expected non-tax revenues, and expenditure savings by some ministries. The target for the next year is likely to be set lower at 5.4% of GDP. The gap between government revenue and expenditure will be a key number that domestic and international businesses and investors will focus on. By 2025 to 2026, the government promises to cut its budget deficit to 4.5% of GDP. However, to achieve this, the fiscal deficit needs to be aggressively reduced by 1.4 percentage points during the next 2 years. It appears difficult to implement such strong fiscal consolidation. This would require drastic cuts to spending, which might not be ideal given the weak level of domestic consumption. However, any adjustments to the tax system to boost consumption will be left for the complete budget. Instead, the government's capital expenditure plan will remain a focus. For this year, capital spending was projected to increase by 37%. Although capital expenditures will probably continue, the rate of expansion could moderate. The budget for capex is likely to show an increase of 12% to 15% for next year. More funding is expected to be allocated to the current welfare programs to assist the less fortunate sectors of the economy. To boost the rural and agricultural sectors, there may be an increase in funding for programs like the PM Kisan and Manrega programs. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
India is well on track to meet its fiscal deficit target this year. The latest data shows that in the first 9 months of the current fiscal year, between April and December 2023, the fiscal deficit is 55% of its full year plan. The government's aim in recent years has been to bring the debt load of the country down. So the finance minister lowered the fiscal deficit target to 5.9% of the GDP for the current fiscal year from 6.4% in 2022-23. The latest data shows the government's efforts are paying off. The boost, though, is coming from higher net tax revenues in the April to December period. At the same time, the government also increased its capital expenditure or spending on building physical infrastructure significantly. The breakdown of the numbers shows that India's solid growth as the main reason for the country's current finances being in control. This comes despite a surge in global commodity prices, which suggest India is well on track to lower its debt load further in the coming years. With the finance minister slated to present the interim budget later on Thursday, the government's thinking on fiscal path will become clearer. International and domestic investors will eye the fiscal deficit target figure in the budget. India is broadly expected to lower the deficit target further to 5.2% to 5.4% in the budget. Now, to discuss all the expectations from the budget, what India can expect, where will we see major announcement? Of course, as we know, this is an interim budget. Let me introduce my guests at this hour. Joining us in the WION studio today is a senior economist, Dr. Vikas Singh. And that's not all. We also have American investor Jim Rogers, who's joining us from Singapore at the moment. Thank you to both my guests for joining me at this hour.
Thank you for having me here.
Right. Dr. Singh, I'd like to take my first question from you. What are your expectations from this budget? While we were talking off camera, you mentioned that...
Everyone, but I don't think that's going to happen. So largely, we're not going to see too many big bang announcements. I would expect the finance minister to give something for the MSME because that's the growth engine. We would also want something for the farmers because these are critical elements of the economy. Don't expect too many big bang announcements, Priyanka.
Right, absolutely. Now let's go over to Jim Rogers. Jim, what are your predictions? Specifically, what do investors, international investors, expect from this budget?
Well, I'm an international investor, and I like to see continued deregulation. The Indian economy has been extremely regulated and controlled for decades, so I hope they continue to open it up. I think they're going to give more to farmers, which is good. India could have great agriculture again. It has in the past. I'm sure they'll give more to women. Everybody loves women, and women need help. So they're going to give out a lot of things, and they're going to promise a balanced budget, as they always do.
Right, absolutely. I'll just like to inform our viewers, we are in fact getting live visuals right now of the finance minister, Nirmala Sitharaman. All eyes are on her as she's scheduled to present the budget. As we can see, she's outside the Ministry of Finance. That is the Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman. Once again, this is the interim budget. So while big bang announcements are not expected, we do have some clarity that part of the focus will be on the youth, on farmers, alleviating poverty, and of course women. Big questions, of course, loom. Can the budget that will be announced in an hour from now, in fact, will it prioritize fiscal consolidation or go the populist way? Can it maintain the momentum of growth in India? Can the government find the resources to continue investing in public infrastructure? Or will it be setting aside more for welfare spending? That is also a focus. It is a rainy day in the Indian capital. For all our viewers tuning into WION at this hour, these are live visuals coming in from the Indian capital, New Delhi, as the Finance Minister heads to present the interim budget, which will be tabled at 11 a.m. IST. Remember, there's renewed focus, as mentioned by the President of India, on youth, farmers, the poor, women. So what will be expected on that front will be watched out. International investors will also be watching as the budget is tabled. Right, let's get back to the studio and go to our guest. Jim, I'm sorry to have interrupted you that time. Tell us a little bit more. As we know, the President of India mentioned yesterday that India is no more a fragile economy. The world is watching what will be the big announcement made today. Once again, this is an interim budget, so while big bang announcements are not expected, what are your expectations?
Well, India has been doing a great job, as you know, Ms. Sharma. I mean, the stock market's at an all-time high or near an all-time high, so somebody's doing something right. Of course, many stock markets around the world are doing well. I would expect, given that an election will be coming soon, that India will give out more good things for more people. There are lots of farmers in India. There are lots of women in India. So think of some place where there are a lot of people, and you'll see more good things coming. Especially women farmers, for instance.
Right, absolutely. You mentioned, that more needs to be done to open up the economy. Tell us more about that.
Well, there are lots of farmers have unbelievable regulations. India has been a huge agricultural power at times in your history. You could be again, and you will be again. I mean, some of the regulations limiting the number of hectares a farmer can have are crazy. Just anything you can to open your economy to trade, free trade, open trade, cut your tariffs. There are many things that India could do. I mean, you're Indian, you know better. I hope you know better than I do. Change it. Make India the great powerhouse that it has been in the past. It could be as good as China someday. I hope you will.
Right. In fact, we are getting live visuals from the Indian capital. It's a rainy morning that Delhi has woken up to today. Foggy, rainy morning, in fact. And now let's come back to our in-studio guest, Dr. Vikas Singh. Dr. Singh, tell us a little bit more about India's current growth momentum. What is needed to be done? What can we expect through the year, in fact, to keep the momentum going, essentially?
I think the momentum's been great, but I just want to stick to this farmers and respond to what Roger's saying. And I think he's absolutely right in saying that we can't leave about 50% of our population behind. The Prime Minister started something about a couple of years ago with the Agri and the Farm Laws Act, and I think this is something that needs to be done, and done very, very urgently, because our study says that the farm gets divided by two every 7 years, assuming that a farmer has about 4 kids, and in a generation, the farm, as it is, the Indian farmer has probably the lowest amount of land compared to any other, and the farming is just not productive. India needs a very, very holistic farm act, farm laws, to really make sure that the farmer's income is doubled, because just by sticking to the same thing, I don't think it's going to happen. And this is not only an economic problem, it's also going to be a social problem. Just imagine the disguised unemployment rate in the farming sector is as high as about 60 to 70%. How do you expect an economy to really grow and thrive when 50% of its population are really left behind? So that's something that the finance minister, she may not be able to do much through this interim budget, but that's something that the government really needs to think about in the future.
Right. Dr. Singh, a question that everybody wants to know, including myself. We were talking about this off camera. Now, despite speculation about this being an interim budget and not big announcements being on the line, some analysts do say that there may be some announcements for income taxpayers and salaried individuals. Tell us more on that.
I think the finance minister must be happy with the rise in the number of filers in the income tax. The tax revenue has been going up. I think the middle class and the salaried class definitely deserve a lower rate of tax, because India is probably the most taxed country in the world, or an economy of similar size. She may not be able to reduce the rate of taxes, but there is scope where something can be done about the NPS, where some more leeway can be given for them to save taxes. Equally important is the debate on housing, interest on housing. I think stayed at about 2 lakh rupees for the last 4-5 years. That's just not enough incentive for a person to really go and invest in housing. And housing sector really kicks and triggers an economic boom. So that's something that is doable. I don't know whether she'll be able to do that or not in the interim budget, but let's expect that and let's hope for it.
Right, absolutely. And we, of course, will be tracking all the updates. Dr. Singh will be with us in studio to get us the analysis once, of course, the budget is tabled. Coming back to you, Jim Rogers, you're with us from Singapore. Now, will India look at fiscal discipline, in your view, or will it move away to boost popular welfare schemes? What's your reading of the situation?
Well, I tell people all the time, if you can only visit one country in your life, it should be India, because it's so fascinating. But you also have the most bureaucracy and red tape in the world. You learn bureaucracy from the English, and you took it to a higher plane, as India can do very well. But open up your agricultural area. That is one of the first things I would do. Certainly, you should give incentive to manufacturers and startups. But India could be, the regulations in agriculture, and I'm not a farmer, I cannot tell you what to do, but don't limit the number of hectares a farmer can use. Don't limit anything. Let there be a free market, and let the Indians, God, my gosh, you've got a lot of smart Indians, let them go nuts and do whatever they want to do, and India will be unbelievably rich again.
That's a very interesting statement. Jim, another question. The current macroeconomic fundamentals, the numbers as they stand as of now, how do they help with India's economic ambitions into the next decade?
Well, if India's economic ambitions, I suspect, are to be one of the major economies of the world. I hope that's your ambitions. But to do that, you have to cut out the regulations and the red tape and give people incentives. You talk about incentives for agriculture, do it. Incentives for small businesses, do it. Incentives for women, do it. I mean, do everything you can to think of. I know you want to buy votes, that's something else. But figure out what you can do to make India the strong and powerful economy that it once was. And my gosh, I think there are lots and lots of smart Indians. I see them all the time. Absolutely. Let them go crazy. Let them do what they want. Let them make a lot of success.
Right, Jim, just a final question before I let you go. Can India compete with China when it comes to manufacturing? I think that's a question that we have to ask.
Well, not yet. China has one ethnic group, one language, one everything, and a strong discipline from Beijing, for better or for worse. India has a ways to go. I mean, you have great diversity, which is one of your strengths, but you also have to have more regulation than nearly other country. I don't know if you've ever been to a bureaucrat's office in India, but Ms. Sharma, you go in, you can't see the bureaucrat. There's so much paper piled up everywhere. If you can cut the bureaucracy, please do, because I have met lots of smart Indians who are restrained by some of the rules. At one time it was illegal for an Indian farmer to have more than 5 hectares. How can you compete with Argentina or Australia or Canada with only 5 hectares? Let them go. Let them open up.
Right. Mr. Rogers, thank you so much for your analysis, and thanks for joining us on WION. Right, Mr. Singh, let's talk about the same question that I asked Jim Rogers just now about manufacturing. It's a huge sector, it's highly talked about, and always the question that's put forward is that can India compete with China? What's your take on this?
I think I agree with Rogers. I think we are far away from competing with China. There are certain specialties, areas that we can really compete, and I think we should focus on that. Rather than trying to take on China, I think we should focus on what our strengths are, work towards that strength, and really make it work. For example, your viewers will know this better than most others, that China is not going to grow as it grew in the last 2 decades. So China's story is the best days of China is over, at least for the next 20-25 years. I think it could be India's couple of decades for India. But there are opportunities in the manufacturing space as well. I also agree with Roger when he says that the bureaucracy is a big challenge. The other challenge that India's corporate sector, particularly the manufacturing face, is that there is a missing middle. I always talk about that unless and until India's MSMEs are encouraged and nurtured to grow to a level where they can really support the large manufacturing organizations, that missing middle really makes our manufacturing sector very, very uncompetitive.
Right.
So,
Dr. Singh, I'll just come in there. You mentioned MSMEs. In fact, they've been the engine of growth to a certain extent. What can they expect?
I think if only the government let them just be. If they don't interfere too much, if there's not too much Inspector Raj, I think the MSME sector can really thrive and do well. For example, one of the things that I always talk about is that less than 1 in 10,000 grow to more than 10 people company. And the government must ask this question, that why do our micro entrepreneurs, why can't they really scale up? And if they ask the right questions, I think they will get the right answer. The right question is, what can we really do to nurture them? What we do for the MSMEs and against the MSMEs, not for, against the MSMEs, is monitor them. We should not monitor. They need nurturing. When a child is 5 years old, you don't monitor. You nurture that child. So that's required. Second thing, and I predict this. I hope the government listens to this. That the formalization of the economy is going to hurt the MSMEs. Definitely in the short run. In the long run, it's going to benefit the economy, but in the short run, it's going to hurt. We are beginning to see that happening. Many MSMEs, close to about 10 lakh MSMEs, are closing down because they just can't fathom the number of the GST filing, the number of filings that they have to do. So the government must be cognizant of that and must work towards that. We can also talk about what else can be done as time goes by, but I think they need nurturing, they don't need monitoring, they don't need inspection, they need help.
Right. Dr. Singh, thank you for that analysis. And you'll, of course, be staying on the WION studio with us and to discuss once the big announcements get underway. We'll also have Daniel Geltrud, an American business and tech analyst. He'll also be joining me on the other side of this very short break. Stay tuned to WION World is One with me, Priyanka Sharma, for continuing coverage of Budget 2024.
On the next episode of World of Africa, Ethiopia's deal to leave a port in Somalia's breakaway region of Somaliland has infuriated the government in Mogadishu and prompted concerns it will further destabilize the Horn of Africa region. Outrage in Kenya over the rise in femicide cases as thousands march and hold protests to call for urgent government action. And beekeepers turn away from honey and harvest venom instead, which is popular in alternative medicine. World of Africa, at these times, only on WION. World is One.
Ready to dive into your daily dose of news? bringing you what's trending in the West and all that's setting trends in the East.
And all of this served up with a side of insightful banter.
We don't just bring you the latest stories.
We bring you your talking points for the day.
And while you do that, from the busy streets of New York, I will provide you with deeper insights on the developments through the course of the day in the U.S.
From New York, we get you to the sandy shores of Durban, where I'll bring you all the glitz, glam, and happenings from the world of showbiz.
Welcome to the Eras Tour.
And I will be here at the WION headquarters, getting you all the action from the universe of sport. All that you need to know about your favorite teams and players, right here.
The show that keeps you ahead of the global curve. A conversation you'd want to be a part of.
A place where news becomes an engaging exchange.
We bring you stories that impact your present.
This is World DNA.
Join the conversation.
WION Health Resort is unique, the only one of its kind. Experience the 4 paths of natural wellness: yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy. Each uniquely customized program improves the whole person to make every person whole. Come to WION Health Resort. Make your reservation at yowon.com.
Welcome back. You're watching WION World is One. My name is Priyanka Sharma. Time now for World Business Watch, a show where we get you the latest from the world of business. Let's start with business headlines, of course. It's a volatile trading session across Asian markets. Asian stocks slide at the open as they track losses on Wall Street overnight. Is the 2023 rally headed for an end? The US Fed keeps interest rates steady in its January policy meeting, but market jitters surface as the Fed Chair Jerome Powell hints at higher rates for longer. India is well on track to meet its fiscal deficit target this year. Latest data reflects a country racing to easily fulfill its fiscal objectives. And coming up on World Business Watch today, we cut down the noise to show you what to expect from India's interim budget, set to be unveiled in some time. All this and more on the show today. Stay tuned. India is well on track to meet its fiscal deficit target this year. The latest data shows that in the first 9 months of the current fiscal year, between April and December 2023, the fiscal deficit is 55% of its full-year plan. The government's aim in recent years has been to bring the debt load of the country down. So the finance minister lowered the fiscal deficit target to 5.9% of the GDP for the current fiscal year from 6.4% in 2022-23. The latest data shows the government's efforts are paying off. The boost, though, is coming from higher net tax revenues in the April to December period. At the same time, the government also increased its capital expenditure or spending on building physical infrastructure significantly. The breakdown of the numbers shows that India's solid growth is the main reason for the country's finances in control. This comes despite a surge in global commodity prices, which suggests India is well on track to lower its debt load further in the coming years. With the finance minister slated to present the interim budget later on Thursday, the government's thinking on the fiscal path will become clearer. International and domestic investors will eye the fiscal deficit target figure in the budget. India is broadly predicted to lower the deficit target further to 5.2% to 5.4% in the budget. Now, as I mentioned, joining me now for more analysis is American tech analyst and investor Daniel Geltrude. Daniel, thanks for joining us. Welcome to WION World is One. So my first question, Daniel, what do international investors expect from India's budget? Daniel, if you can hear me, my question to you is, what can American investors, international investors expect from India's budget going forward?
I think when you look at what India's upcoming budget is going to be, you're going to have growth, right? Investment-driven growth. Now, how do you achieve that? Well, I'm looking at this and saying there's got to be at least a 10% increase in capital expenditures. In other words, you have to invest in India in order to get the production. Now, over the last couple of years, we've had about a 20% capital expenditure rate. So I think it's reasonable taking it down to 10% as an expectation that we should be seeing. And then another thing I'm looking for here is to say, how much more attention can we give to the rural economy? This is an area that we've been hearing promises from the Modi government, and they really haven't done enough yet. So I want to see a little bit more attention paid to that untapped resource of India's rural economy.
Right, absolutely. In fact, there's a big ambition, as we know. What are the challenges that India could face in its big, bold ambition to become a $5 trillion economy in the next 2 years?
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty around the world. So certainly when we're looking at getting to $5 trillion, let's say, in the next couple of years, you're going to need about a 7.5% growth rate in order to be able to get to $5 trillion over the next 4 years. So I really think that it's a tall order to get there in 2 years. Now listen, India has the largest labor pool in the world. So we really need to focus in on how to improve productivity. Now, this is still doable, but you could always have unforeseen events. Look, wars in the Middle East, you have terrorist attacks going on in the Red Sea, which is having an impact on the entire world's economy. So there's always a lot of variables to deal with. But is it possible? Yes, it is.
Absolutely. And ease of doing business, that of course is always a big focus when it comes to India. What do you expect on that front going forward?
Well, in terms of India's ability to do business worldwide, I think India has so much potential out there. The Modi government has actually displayed a lot of fiscal discipline, which is good because it drives your credit rating up, which means your ability to borrow money more cheaply. And we all know that borrowing money is critical in building infrastructure. The problem also comes, it's an election year, so you also have this welfare spending that's going on, which is a very popular thing to do. You got to keep that in check, because what that starts to do is creating inflation. So it's really striking a balance between fiscal discipline and what you're going to spend on welfare programs.
Right, Daniel, thank you so much for that analysis. Thanks for joining us on WION. We'll keep coming back to you for more once the budget is tabled, of course.
Thank you.
Now, to discuss this and more, we are also being joined by Madan Sabnavis, the chief economist at the Bank of Baroda. He's live with us from Mumbai. Mr. Sabnavis, welcome to WION. Now, since morning, we've been talking about capital expenditure, investing in India, investing in public infrastructure. So my question to you is, will we see yet another hike in the capital expenditure this time ahead of the polls?
No, absolutely. I think there will definitely be an increase in capex. The question is as to what kind of an increase are we going to see? We should remember that in the last budget, we had around 10 lakh crores being allocated for capital expenditure, and overall size of the budget was around 45 lakh crores. Now, assuming that the size of the budget goes closer towards the 50 lakh crore mark, I think the question is, are we still going to have 20% allocation for capital expenditure, or will it be a little bit more? So it all depends upon how these numbers really fit up, because I think there are lots of commitments which are there on the social welfare side, which is absolutely essential, because when you look at the data on poverty, it has been shown by Niti Aayog, it's come down primarily on account of government direct interference, or rather direct intervention. That is what has lifted people out of poverty. So I think that is also a necessary thing to do. So it's a case of how do we strike kind of a balance between social welfare as well as capex. And I think the government has shown its ability to do it in the last 3 or 4 budgets. And one can be confident that this will be done this time too.
Right. Let's talk about defense spending. The year 2023 was a year of geopolitical turmoil, 2 wars, West Asia on the boil, the Red Sea in crisis, things that impact everybody as we go into 2024 as well. So my question to you now is, how crucial is India's defense spending this time around?
The defense spending will always be important, because as long as we have tensions along the borders, it is necessary that we need to be up to date. And whatever has to be done, has to be done. So I think that is a place where there can be little compromise, both in terms of revenue as well as capital expenditure. So if you look at the overall capital expenditure spending of the government of India, I think after roads and railways, defense is the third important category. And I think it will continue to occupy this important space as we have to continue to invest in capital in the defense sector. There can be no compromise out here.
Let's talk about MSMEs. They're poised to be the growth engine that drives the economy forward. Can they look forward to the budget this time around?
I think the way in which the budget has normally been addressing the concerns of the MSMEs is more through the budget by giving the guarantees on the credit which has been given by the banking system. So I think the strategy will carry on in that particular manner. I don't think there will be anything directly which the government can hand out to the MSMEs, because we should remember that MSMEs are not a single entity. There are 50 million such enterprises, of which 95% or 96% are actually in a micro sector. You may not be able to identify them. So I think it will have to be done more through the banking system in terms of overall flow of credit. I think that's what the government has been doing in the past, and that's what's going to be replicated. There could be certain kind of additional funds available to the refinancing organizations, like, say, for example, look at Apex organization like SIDBI. There could be something coming from that side. But actually, if you're looking in terms of the interaction of the government along with the MSMEs, it'll have to be through one of these channels.
Mr. Sabnavis, yesterday the President of India mentioned that India is no more a fragile economy. You can't count it as such anymore. In fact, in a year where we've seen global turmoil, a financial crisis, inflation, India can offer a glimmer of hope. So what does the government need to do to keep the momentum going, to maintain the high rate of growth, the high domestic demand that we're seeing right now?
So I think one thing which we should realize is that the government is only one particular part of the economic growth story of India. So if you look at the overall size of the budget, let's assume it's 50 lakh crores. We're talking of a GDP in the region of around 300 lakh crores for last year. It's around 1/6. That's the overall size of the budget. The primary thrust has to come from the from the private sector, which has to keep performing. And what we have seen is that there has been a bit of slack when it comes to private sector investment. There have been problems on the consumption side. So I don't think there is a panacea for this through the government budget route. So the government does what it can in terms of providing social welfare, making sure that people have an income which they can spend. That's number one. 2, they're doing something on the capex front. 3, they provide certain incentives to industry to push up production. Like, look at the PLI scheme which we had. It had an outlay of around 2 lakh crores to be spread over a period of 4 to 5 years. But if you actually see what is the response has to come from the private sector. So today we see that the private sector investment is not keeping pace, primarily on account of slack, which we see in consumption. Consumption too, we have seen that the rural economy has not been doing that well because of problems on the agricultural front in the last couple of years. And with low capacity utilization rates, we're not seeing broad-based investment taking place. So I think when you're talking in terms of future growth, it has to be led by the private sector. The government can provide an enabling policy environment, which I think it has been doing all through, and contribute in its own way directly through the budget, which it does through the capex front.
Yeah, sir, you mentioned the rural economy. Part of the renewed focus this year will be, as I understand, on the youth, farmers, the poor, alleviating poverty, and women. So what's your reading on that?
No, I think this has been a theme which has played out in the last few budgets, and there's no reason why it should change. The focus will definitely be in terms of empowerment of these segments, because we're talking of the youth, for example. We need to have an educated youth. They need to have the requisite skill sets so that they're able to take on the challenges, able to create, get themselves employed in meaningful manners. We don't really require construction workers or the Swiggy workers. They're not the ones who are going to lead to higher levels of consumption in future. It has to be an educated, skilled labor force. Similarly, we need to have more women participating in the workforce. It is happening more in the urban areas rather than the rural areas. I think there is some issue out there. So we need to empower women, make sure that they're able to get jobs even in the rural areas, so that it becomes all-encompassing when we're talking in terms of women or the youth actually driving this entire process of growth in the economy in the next 5 years.
Right, Mr. Savnavis, thank you so much for your analysis. Thanks for joining us on WION. Coming back to Dr. Singh now, senior economist who's with us in the WION studio today. Dr. Singh, tell us a little bit about India's Make in India ambitions, the Atmanirbhar program, and how will India keep the ball rolling on that?
I think it's been a great initiative by the government. And I think it's paid dividends. It's going to pay, but I think the good days are ahead, not behind. The government has now identified several other sectors as well. So it's been a good scheme. I would also want it to be lowered down to the micro, not to the micro, but to the small and medium enterprises as well, because as we spoke about earlier, that unless we are able to get the entire value chain in place, the benefits of the PLI scheme really doesn't flow down. So PLI is a good scheme to bolster the manufacturing sector, but much more needs to be done. What the government also needs to do is, somebody talked about the ease of doing business, but the cost of doing business has really gone up. So the productivity is still low. So if we want to compete with China, and if we really want to be the manufacturing or the factory of the world, we need to focus on the peripherals of this. PLI scheme has been good. It's going to pay dividend, but I think much more needs to be done to make sure that the other enablers are also in place. Particularly, the productivity has to go up. Our logistics costs, in spite of the investment that we have made in the capex, are still very, very high. Our productivity is still low. The cost of doing business is still very high. If you combine all these, it's very, very difficult for our manufacturers to really compete with the world. So that's something that needs to be done.
Absolutely. Dr. Singh, let's talk about the tax regime. As I understand, analysts are also saying that some efforts will be put to make the new tax regime more attractive.
I think that's been, I think the government's aim is to move everybody to the new tax regime, and I think it's been a good regime as well. And the government has been kind enough, gracious enough to give the leeway to the people to decide, at least to the individuals to decide whether they want to be in the new or the old. But I think the objective is to move everybody to the new. I think the new regime is more efficient. The new regime also doesn't interfere too much in the lives of the people. So there is a distance between the tax authorities and the people. So I think people should move to the new regime. I think my guess is that this budget will probably give a direction or give some kind of a deadline for people to move to the new tax regime.
Absolutely. Right. Let's introduce our next guest of this hour. For more analysis, we are also being joined by Mark Matthews, the Managing Director at Julius Baer & Co. Bank. He's live with us from Singapore. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, my first question, sir, what do international investors want from India's budget 2024?
Well, it depends what kind of investor. Are they an equity investor or a bond investor? I think bond investors would like some assurance that the fiscal deficit will come back into that target of about 4.5% in a couple of years. And I think the government will probably say something to that effect, that the quality of the capital expenditure is very solid, which it is, by the way, and so that will allow GDP growth to continue and tax collection to continue to grow, and therefore India can achieve 4.5%. And of course, that looks pretty good compared to the rest of the world, because the rest of the world, the United States, for example, their fiscal deficit as a percent of GDP is over 7% now. Equity investors care about growth, and so I think I don't know if they're going to be that focused on this budget because, as you know, the big news won't really come out until after the election in the July main budget. But I think they'll be paying attention to any populist measures. And if we recall, when Vajpayee was Prime Minister 20-odd years ago, there was very strong and decent growth, but it took a while to percolate down into the rural sectors. So his India Shining campaign didn't actually help him that much when it came to the elections. And so I think that there'll probably be some thing for the farmer. I don't really know what, but something populist as well.
Right, let's talk about India's ambition. The government's report recently on India likely to become a $7 trillion economy by 2030. Is that a realistic ambition in your view?
Well, let's see. That's 6 years from now. I do think that's actually achievable because something happened about 6 or 7 years ago, which was really extremely rare in democracies, which was the big reforms we all know about, the GST and the bankruptcy court and the Property Act and all those things. And they're the kind of deep structural reform that most democracies are very reluctant to impose because they hurt in the short and medium term. And so chances are you're not going to get reelected. And so the thing is that once you've gotten past that stage, when that kind of reform has been implemented and the economy is adjusted to it, it's such a strong building base from which you really create a new economy. And so that's what's happened. And I think the most important thing I would say is the small and medium-sized enterprises, which are probably about a third of the economy, were dragged kicking and screaming into the real economy, which they never really were in before, through tax collection. And therefore, all these taxes that the government is a recipient of and has been spending on investments and physical infrastructure have really changed the economy so much that it can now become a manufacturing economy, not just for its own very large domestic market, but for the rest of the world. And the implications of that are very profound, and I think will allow the economy to roughly double in the time period you're talking about.
Mr. Matthews, you mentioned small businesses. In fact, as you rightly mentioned, they are driving growth, the growth engine, so to speak. What can be done to keep that growth momentum going? Women-led businesses, smaller businesses, startups?
Off the top of my head, I don't have any advice. I'm not very good when it comes to that, but I feel the economy is doing so well anyway, growing at around 7%, that you don't really need to do much more. It's just organically found a way to adjust to the new tax regime, and that's in the rearview mirror now. And so I just don't think you need to do a lot more. It's already growing very well just on its own.
I'd also like to pick your brain about capital expenditure, investing in India's infrastructure. Can you give our viewers a sense of why capital expenditure by the private sector is so important given the fiscal challenges to the government?
Well, I suppose that the obvious answer is that if the private sector is doing the investing, then the government doesn't have to borrow much money and spend a lot of money to build it. And so it's better for the government if the private sector is doing it. That would be the obvious answer. And of course, therefore, the deficit isn't as wide and the credit rating is a good one and cost of borrowing is lower. That's sort of the thought process behind getting the private sector involved in infrastructure spending.
Right. This, of course, 2023 was a year of geopolitical conflict, 2 wars, the crisis in the Red Sea. In all of that, as you mentioned, India has been sort of a glimmer of hope, given how the economy is faring. So what can be done to keep that high rate of growth, the momentum going?
Well, I think the simple answer is don't get in the way. Isn't that what Ronald Reagan said? I don't remember precisely, but he said something like, the best thing for government to do is just leave the private sector alone. And I think that's what India is doing. It's a pro-business government, and we're bearing the fruits of that now. So I wouldn't tinker with what, the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right. If you had a wish list of sorts or one big ask, what would that be?
Well, that's one big wish for the Indian market. I suppose I'd like to see more access for foreigners, and that could be through allowing them to own stocks directly onshore or more ADRs offshore. But it's easy to buy an Indian ETF or a emerging market ETF, and that's what most people do. But ultimately, as this becomes a bigger and more important market, it would be nice if foreigners could themselves invest directly in single securities.
Right. Any particular element that the international investor market will be watching out for in the budget?
As I said, it depends if they're equity or bond investors, but I don't really think, sorry to pour water on this, but the budget's that important anymore. Sorry to say that. I think that especially with all the reforms that have been done, this is an economy that's just very robust by itself, and so it doesn't need much help. And then on top of that, we all know with the election coming and this being an interim budget, anything really meaningful won't come out until July. So I don't think people are really paying that much attention to it, to be honest.
Right, Mr. Matthews, thank you so much for your analysis and thanks for joining us on WION at this hour. Time now to take a quick break on WION World is One. We'll continue to get you the latest about the budget, the expected announcements, and of course the predictions. Stay tuned.
India's Global Voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is One.
In 1979, two batchmates from CMTI teamed up with their mentor to create a small engineering design bureau.
We could conceive machines from first principles, and that's where we got the confidence that can we start a consulting company where we do design for others. We had got an opportunity to make special machines for a company called Car Mobiles Limited. Once we started showing the exhibition, other auto component companies started coming to us. We realized that if you want to learn anything, buy the best book on the subject, study the fundamentals, and apply it in your context.
As election fever grips Pakistan, WION gets you all the twists and turns. The row over election and selection. Players who matter and what's at stake.
नौजवानों का मुस्तकबिल मेरी सबसे ज्यादा तवज्जो होगी। गुर्बत का खात्मा करना होगा। एक बार मौका दीजिए। अगर आप अपने हुकूक के लिए नहीं खड़े हो, तो आप गुलामों की जिंदगी गुजारो।
The highs and lows as the campaign peaks.
I'm Anas Malik. Catch me on WION as I bring you all the latest updates and developments from ground zero.
Who will emerge as Pakistan's next leader?
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy in personalized programs that help you take charge of your own health. A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at YoOne.com.
In 1979, two batchmates from CMTI teamed up with their mentor to create a small engineering design bureau.
We could conceive machines from first principles, and that's where we got the confidence that can we start a consulting company where we do design for others. We have got an opportunity to make special machines for a company called Car Mobiles Limited. Once we started showing the exhibition, other auto component companies started coming to us. We realized that if you want to learn anything, buy the best book on the subject, study the fundamentals, and apply it in your context.
On the next episode of World of Africa, Ethiopia's deal to leave a port in Somalia's breakaway region of Somaliland has infuriated the government in Mogadishu and prompted concerns it will further destabilize the Horn of Africa region. Outrage in Kenya over the rise in femicide cases as thousands march and hold protests to call for urgent government action. And beekeepers turn away from honey and harvest venom instead, which is popular in alternative medicine. World of Africa, at these times, only on WION. World is One.
As election fever grips Pakistan, WION gets you all the twists and turns. The row over election and selection, players who matter and what's at stake.
नौजवानों का मुस्तकबिल मेरी सबसे ज्यादा तवज्जो होगी। गुर्बत का खात्मा करना होगा। एक बार मौका दीजिए। अगर आप अपने हुकूक के लिए नहीं खड़े हो, आप गुलामों की जिंदगी गुजारो।
The highs and lows as the campaign peaks.
I'm Anas Malik. Catch me on WION as I bring you all the latest updates and developments from ground zero.
Who will emerge as Pakistan's next leader?
On the next episode of World of Africa, Ethiopia's deal to leave a port in Somalia's breakaway region of Somaliland has infuriated the government in Mogadishu and prompted concerns it will further destabilize the Horn of Africa region. Outrage in Kenya over the rise in femicide cases as thousands march and hold protests to call for urgent government action. And beekeepers turn away from honey and harvest venom instead, which is popular in alternative medicine. World of Africa, at these times, only on WION. World is One.
Hello everyone and welcome to this special show. It's that time of the year when we start looking at the budget, where we get ready for Nirmala Sitharaman, who's now been finance minister for a long, long time, to stand up and to say what she intends to do with the finances of the country. But this time, of course, there is a difference. It's only an interim budget. It's an interim budget because the country is going for Lok Sabha polls in a couple of months, and we've heard, as is been the system and the tradition till now, this is going to be only an interim budget. We're expecting to hear something very basic about the direction of the economy, some basic vote on account, if you like, on the finances of the government, and perhaps indications of what the Modi government will do if it is in fact re-elected. And that perhaps will be the highlight of what we're going to be looking at in the next couple of hours. And we're going to have a range of experts telling us not just what they think about the speech itself, but also of the direction of the economy. And it's great to have with us right here in the studio Ajit Gulabchand, chairman of Hindustan Construction Company. Of course, construction infrastructure being one of the highlights of what we've been seeing. DK Joshi is also with us, chief economist of CRISIL, and Dr. Vikas Singh also with us. Let me just start with you, Ajit. Interim budget normally means that you don't have any dramatic announcements, nothing major is done, you'll wait for the elections and then there'll be a proper budget after that. So what are you going to be really listening to very carefully over the next few hours?
I think it won't be devoid of some dramatic announcements. It won't be that they would not pass any law or pass the bill with those dramatic changes that they wish to have, if they are going to have. This would be more a roll call of what they have done so far, what they've done for the country, where the country stands as a result of their efforts, how does it fare against the rest of the world in this troubled atmosphere around the world. And then, of course, there would be indications of what they propose to do if they came back to power, which seems most likely. But the fact is that...
So that would mean a little bit of an election manifesto in there also, right? Especially aimed at India Inc. to say, vote us back and here are the things we're going to be doing.
Well, I mean, think about it, Vikram. Would you let go the opportunity to do a little election manifesto?
That's also often happened in budgets, you do that.
So this is what the interim budget... And the other real purpose of the interim budget is you need to have finances to continue to spend after March. For that you need some kind of an approval of Parliament, and which is what they'll get. But that's just the technicality of the budget. But the real thing is what we are expecting is that what they have done, how they have secured India's economic space very well, and that they are still to complete some unfinished agendas, and that is what I'm expecting to hear.
Right. DK Joshi, let me just turn to you on that front. So that's one, there's a procedural aspect, right? The finances. You need to get the ability to spend till the elections are concluded and a new government is sworn in and a new budget comes. So that's the functional aspect of it. The rest of it, as we were just hearing from Ajit, may well be a recital of what the government has done and a manifesto, if you like, of what the government will do if elected back in.
Yeah, that's right. I think I agree with that. One thing that I would specifically be looking at is the budget math, because for two reasons. One, the government has been fiscally conservative, and second, I think they retain the budget math of the interim budget in the final budget. I think we saw that when the government came to power in 2014, they retained the fiscal targets set by the previous government. And now I think in 2019, again, they did the same. So I would, extrapolating the past behavior, I would assume that this budget would fiscal numbers would be more would be something to look at. And these are very important numbers because in one, India needs to go on a fiscal consolidation path as it had committed. Second, I think the so far government has pushed.
Right. Ajit, looking at what the government's already done, you would expect to see some of that has already been mentioned in the economic review. It's talked about the history right from the time of independence, how you went from there was 3% growth, 4% growth, then increasing, and talking about a lot of the structural reforms that have been done over the last 6-7 years. What would be some of the highlights from that you'd like to talk about? What have been the really revolutionary reforms that we have seen, and what is it that you'd like to see some indication even today that this is what we're going to be doing next?
In terms of a 10-year period that this government is in office, I think they have done many reforms that are there, from a variety of new bills, new ways of doing things, and with the advent of digitizing many things, they have been able to deliver services to the citizens of this country, to the welfare schemes, etc., much more efficiently and with much less or practically no write-offs. So in this context, what we will now expect is I would stay with this field that my company is in infrastructure.
Yeah.
One thing this government has achieved is that so far the highest spend we have really had is about 4 to 5% of GDP on infrastructure. This is the first time in many, many years that we have actually spent 7% of GDP and 8%. And if you take some of the agricultural expenditure which counts as infrastructure, it would go almost to 10%, which has given infrastructure a big boost. And that is the foundation on which, whether it is manufacturing or services, is based on. So I think they are concentrating.
And it's been both physical infrastructure, of course, which directly affects you, and also a lot of digital infrastructure has been built.
Yes.
India,
UPI. But it improves the productivity of what we are doing. It allows us to do things we never thought we could do. And I think to that extent, they will continue on that path, is what I feel. And that they don't have to really wait for the new real budget to come in on the interim to give the indication that they're going to continue on this path.
Looking at it from the point of view of infrastructure, I'm sure governments in the past would have also wanted to spend on infrastructure. They have to spend on defense. It's a tough world out there. You want to spend on welfare measures, on food grain and other things. It's often been felt there wasn't the fiscal space for that earlier. If there seems to be some fiscal space for this right now, why is that? Is it because of tax buoyancy? Is it because certain other things are being managed better?
No, the fiscal space continues to cause a certain anxiety, because if our fiscal deficits grow a little high, the ratings of the country comes down, and it affects almost everything you want to do. So there would be a concern, and they would address it so. But they've been so far able to manage the fiscal deficit control as well as have high expenditure on different kinds of infrastructure, even welfare, or more than welfare, a number of things that they have done, because we went through a terrible COVID area in which many people once again came below the poverty line, and therefore they needed to do something to see that they don't go under. And I think to that extent, they've managed the finances very well on the subject. Second is, yes, the GST has been able to give you much more tax coverage. The buoyancy of the Indian industry that it is looking forward to is also increased the tax take that the government has got. So I think overall they are in a more comfortable position, but the risk of fiscal deficit is still not gone.
Okay.
And they will be careful about it.
If I can just come back to you, sir, on that particular point, where we are talking about the fiscal deficit, where we are talking about what potentially, that is somewhere where we'll get some numbers in the budget. Do you think the fiscal space of the government, Mr. Joshi, is on solid enough grounds? And what do you think are some of the reasons for it? Is it that the benefits of GST are now being seen? We are seeing that buoyancy. We are seeing, 1.72 lakh crores coming in every single month from GST. Is that the reason for it? Is it the fact that we didn't do a major demand push during the pandemic? What accounts for it?
Well, I think a couple of things. Number one is that the economy itself is doing well. So when the economy does well, the tax collections are also buoyant. The second is the compliance in taxes has improved, I think, as was being pointed out, particularly with respect to GST. But the bigger story is the direct tax collections. I think the personal income tax collections, etc., have grown much faster than what was anticipated. And that's a result of, I think, digitalization and all those, I think, being able to capture a lot of people. So all that is paying off, and tax collections doing better than expected always gives government a fiscal space. Second, I think the government's strategy, particularly post the pandemic. During the pandemic, they had to do a lot of welfare spend. But as soon as the pandemic ended, they very quickly switched to capital expenditure. And particularly in the last budget, the capex was increased quite significantly, and that too into infrastructure areas. So clearly, the focus is more on creating productive capacity for the economy through the budget, and not so much on firing the consumption, which typically becomes inflationary in nature if pursued for a longer period of time. So clearly, I think that pragmatism has helped the economy grow a little faster than what was expected. By the way, the economic survey in 2023, January, had said economy will grow at 6.5%. That looked very optimistic at that time, but actually the numbers tell us that it actually grew faster than that at probably 7.3%. So the economy's, the pragmatic choices, as well as I think the ability of the economy to face global shocks quite resiliently, I think all that has helped. And I think that has also helped because